You think you have heard every nightmare in-law story, but try being humiliated at your own wedding rehearsal. My future mother-in-law pointed to the staff table and told me to sit with the help. I did not scream, I just smiled, because while she was busy playing power games, she had no idea I was holding the evidence that could tear her precious family empire apart. My name is Mara Whitfield, and if there is one thing 34 years on this earth has taught me, it is that silence is the loudest sound in the room when you know exactly what you are worth. I stood near the entrance of the gilded ballroom in Seabriar Harbor, watching the sunset bleed orange and violet across the Atlantic Ocean, reflecting off the crystal champagne flutes that I had paid for. The air smelled of expensive perfume, salt spray, and the distinct, metallic scent of judgment. To the 50 or so guests mingling under the high vaulted ceilings, I was just the woman marrying Graham Hale. I was the outsider. The one they whispered about behind manicured hands, calling me pragmatic, unromantic, or worse, the one who only understood the language of money. They were not entirely wrong. I do understand money. I understand it better than they do, which is precisely why I was the one funding this entire rehearsal dinner. The venue was exquisite, a historic mansion converted into an event space that cost more for one evening than most people earned in 6 months. The flowers were white hydrangeas and imported orchids, arranged in towering displays that screamed old money elegance. The string quartet playing in the corner was charging $300 an hour per musician. I knew these numbers by heart because the invoices were currently sitting in my email outbox, marked as paid. When Daphne Hale, my future mother-in-law, had suggested this venue, she had sighed dramatically and said that the family was currently liquidating some assets for a new venture, so it would be wonderful if I could handle the rehearsal costs to keep up appearances. She called it preserving the family dignity. I called it an investment in my future peace of mind. I was wrong. Graham was across the room, laughing with his cousin. He looked handsome in his navy blazer, his sandy hair falling over his forehead in that boyish way that usually made my chest ache with affection. Tonight, however, watching him blend so seamlessly into this world of effortless privilege, I felt a strange distance opening up between us. He was a Hale. He had grown up believing that things just happened, that dinners appeared, bills vanished, and problems were solved by people like me. I took a sip of sparkling water, my eyes scanning the room. I worked as a senior risk assessment investigator for Northgate Integrity Partners. My job was to look at a company or a person, strip away the glossy exterior, and find the rot hidden in the foundation. I was good at it. I could spot a fraudulent ledger or a hidden liability from a mile away. But love has a way of dulling your professional instincts. I had ignored the red flags with the Hales because I loved Graham. I had ignored the way Daphne constantly introduced me as Graham's capable fiancé rather than his beautiful one. I had ignored the way his sister, Tessa, treated me like a personal assistant, texting me at 2 a.m. to ask if I had confirmed the limousine drivers. The music swelled, signaling that it was time for the walkthrough. The rehearsal itself was merely a formality, a choreographed dance to ensure that tomorrow, the actual wedding day, would look perfect for the society pages. Daphne Hale swept into the center of the room, clapping her hands. She was a small woman, but she took up a lot of space. She wore a silk dress the color of champagne, and her smile was fixed in place, a weaponized expression of hospitality. "Everyone, please," Daphne called out, her voice projecting with the practiced ease of a woman who has spent 40 years chairing charity galas. "If we could gather by the main tables, we need to run through the seating logistics for the dinner tonight before we practice the ceremony." The guests shuffled forward, holding their drinks. I walked over to stand next to Graham. He smiled at me, squeezing my hand. His palm was warm, but his grip felt loose, distracted. "Mom is in rare form tonight," he whispered, leaning down. "Just let her run the show, okay? It makes her happy." "I paid for the show, Graham," I said quietly. "She can direct it, but let's remember who built the stage." Graham laughed nervously, patting my arm as if I had made a joke. He did not get it. He never truly got it. Daphne was standing by the large easel that held the seating chart for tonight's dinner. It was a beautiful chart, calligraphy on heavy cream cardstock, framed in gold. I had approved the proof 3 days ago. It had the head table centered, with the parents and the bridal party flanking us. It was standard. It was respectful. But as I looked closer, I realized the chart on the easel was not the one I had approved. The calligraphy was different. The layout had changed. "Now," Daphne announced, her eyes sweeping over the crowd before landing on me. There was a glimmer in her gaze that I recognized. It was the look a predator gives before the pounce, masked by the veneer of civilization. "We have had to make a few last-minute adjustments to the seating for the rehearsal dinner to accommodate some of our cousins who flew in from Europe this morning." I felt a prickle of unease at the base of my neck. Cousins from Europe? I had managed the guest list. There were no surprise cousins. "Graham, darling, you will sit here at the head table with me, your father, and Tessa," Daphne said, tapping the center of the board, "and the groomsmen will take the table to the right." "And Mara?" Graham asked, looking at the board. "I don't see Mara's name at the head table." The room went quiet. The string quartet had stopped playing, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. Daphne smiled, a tight, pitying expression. "Oh, Mara." "Yes, I thought about this extensively, since you have been so hands-on with the logistics, dear, and since you seem to be the only one who really understands how the vendors operate, I decided it would be best if you sat over there." She pointed. Her manicured finger was not pointing at a guest table. She was pointing to a small, folding table tucked into the far corner, near the swinging kitchen doors. It was the table set up for the audio technicians and the event coordinator, the people Daphne referred to as the help. "Excuse me?" I said. My voice was calm, steady. It was the voice I used when I was deposing a CEO suspected of embezzlement. "It is just for logistics, darling," Daphne said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness, loud enough for every single person in the room to hear. "You are so good at managing the staff. If you sit with them, you can direct the service more efficiently. We want everything to be perfect for Graham. Do we not? You are the practical one. You do not mind getting your hands dirty." The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of shock. 50 people stood there, frozen. They looked from Daphne to me, and then to the folding table in the corner. I looked at Graham. This was his moment. This was the test. If he loved me, if he respected me as his future wife, he would step forward. He would take his mother's hand, lower it, and tell her that his bride sat beside him, or there would be no dinner at all. Graham blinked. He looked at his mother, then at me. He looked terrified, not of losing me, but of causing a scene. "Mara," Graham said, his voice low, pleading. "Mom is just... She is just trying to make sure things run smooth. It is just for tonight. You know how she gets." Just for tonight. The words echoed in my head. They were not just words. They were a verdict. In that split second, the man I thought I was marrying vanished, replaced by a coward in a tailored suit. I looked back at Daphne. She was watching me, her chin slightly lifted. She expected me to cry. She expected me to stomp my foot, to make a scene, to prove to everyone that I was the emotional, unrefined outsider she had always claimed I was. Or she expected me to submit, to walk over to that folding table and accept my place as the financier servant of the Hale family. She wanted me to break. Instead, I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. It was the sensation of a switch flipping. It was the professional detachment taking over. I was no longer a bride. I was an auditor, and I had just discovered a massive discrepancy in the books. I did not scream. I did not cry. I widened my smile, letting it reach my eyes, though there was no warmth in it. "Of course, Daphne," I said. My voice was clear, ringing through the silent hall. "You are absolutely right. Efficiency is key. I would not want to disrupt the flow of the Hale family dinner." Daphne blinked. Surprised by my capitulation, the tension in the room released slightly, guests letting out nervous chuckles, relieved that the drama had been averted. "See?" Daphne beamed, turning to the guests. "Mara is so sensible, a perfect addition to the support system of this family." Support system, not family member. Support system. I walked over to the easel. I stood there for a moment, studying the chart where my name was conspicuously absent from the high table. I could see the ghost of an erasure where my name had been before she changed it. "I will just go check on the vendors now," I said. "Make sure they are prepared for the changes." "Excellent," Daphne said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand as she turned back to her son. "Now, Graham, about the toast." I reached out and touched the edge of the seating chart. The paper felt thick and expensive under my fingertip. I traced the line of the gold frame. To anyone watching, it looked like a gesture of resignation. But inside my mind, I was already moving assets. I was already drafting termination clauses. I was already picturing the file folder sitting in my encrypted cloud drive, the one labeled Hail, Due Diligence, which I had never fully opened because I wanted to trust them. I was not just touching a piece of paper. I was signing a warrant. I turned away from the easel and began to walk toward the back of the room, toward the shadows where the staff stood waiting. I kept my head high, my steps measured. Let them have their appetizers. Let them have their champagne. Let them think they had put me in my place. They had no idea that by moving me to the vendor table, Daphne had not humbled me. She had just given me a direct line to the only people in this room who actually knew how the machinery worked, and she had freed me from the obligation of mercy. I pulled my phone from my clutch as I walked, the screen lighting up my face in the dim corner. I did not check my messages. I opened my banking app. I glanced back one last time at the head table, where Graham was now sitting next to his mother, nodding as she spoke, a glass of wine in his hand. He did not look at me. I tapped the screen, my finger hovering over a transfer option, but I did not press it yet. Not yet. Tonight, I would sit with the help. Tomorrow, the Hales would learn that the help knows everything, and the one who signs the checks owns the building. The folding table wobbly beneath my elbows offered a perfect vantage point to observe the ecosystem of the Hale family. From this distance, separated from the laughter and the clinking of fine crystal by a buffer of 20 feet and a social chasm a mile wide. The hierarchy was undeniable. The Hales were what people in this part of the country called old money, though if you looked at their liquidity ratios as closely as I had, you would realize the money part was becoming more theoretical than actual. They were third-generation wealth, the most dangerous kind. The first generation builds the empire. The second generation maintains it. The third generation spends it while believing they are entitled to it by divine right. The Hale Meridian Group, their family real estate development firm, was less of a business and more of a monument to their own ego. They liked power. They liked the appearance of influence. Most of all, they liked having people around who made them feel like the sun around which the rest of the world politely revolved. I was not one of those people. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in a town where the only view was the back of a grocery store. I put myself through college waiting tables and working night shifts at a data entry center. Now, at 34, I was a senior risk investigator for Northgate Integrity Partners. My entire career was built on the premise that people lie. CEOs lie about their profit margins. Managers lie about their safety protocols. And families like the Hales lie to themselves about their relevance. I was trained to find the crack in the facade, the one loose thread that, if pulled, unravels the entire tapestry. It was ironic, really. Daphne Hale loved to tell her friends how lucky Graham was to have found someone so grounded. That was her code word for working class. Since the day Graham slipped that ring on my finger, the Hales had praised me. But their compliments always felt like they were patting a golden retriever on the head for fetching a slipper. "Mara is so good with paperwork," Daphne would coo at brunch, steering the waiter toward me when the bill arrived. She actually enjoys the tedious parts of life. Mara handles the logistics. Tessa, Graham's older sister, would say while sipping a mimosa I had paid for. She has such a head for service. They did not see me as a wife for Graham. They saw me as an acquisition of human capital. They saw a project manager, a fixer, someone to handle the dirty work that might chip their manicured nails. I took a bite of the cold bread roll that had been placed on my staff table. It was dry. I thought back to 3 months ago, when the wedding planning really kicked into high gear. Tessa had insisted on handling the florist because she claimed she had a vision. 2 weeks later, the florist called me in a panic because Tessa had changed the order 4 times and the check for the deposit had bounced. When I confronted Tessa, she had laughed it off, waving a hand as if money were an abstract concept she need not bother with. "Oh, just cover it for now. Mara," she had said, not even looking up from her phone. "You are so much better at the banking stuff. We will settle up later." I covered it. We never settled up. Then there was the issue with the invitations. Daphne insisted on using her personal stationer, a woman who had printed invitations for the governor. When the proofs arrived, I noticed something subtle but unmistakable. The names of Graham's parents were printed in a sweeping, elegant script, taking up the top third of the card. My parents' names were at the bottom, in a font size that was at least 2 points smaller, crammed together as if they were a legal disclaimer. When I pointed it out, Daphne had sighed, the sound of a martyr being forced to explain quantum physics to a toddler. "It is just about balance, dear. The design needs to breathe. Your parents have shorter names." It looked cluttered otherwise. "You are overthinking it." I did not fight it. I let it go because I looked at Graham, and I saw the relief in his eyes when I didn't cause a scene. Graham. I looked at him now at the head table. He was laughing at something his father said. His posture relaxed. I loved him. I truly did. He was kind in a way his family was not. Soft where they were brittle. But he was also a man who had spent 32 years being eroded by the relentless current of his mother's will. He was stuck in the middle, a peacekeeper in a war he did not realize was happening. He thought if we all just smiled enough, the friction would disappear. He told me constantly that I just needed to be patient, that his mother was old-fashioned, that this was just how they showed affection. He did not understand that to people like Daphne, affection was conditional. You were loved as long as you were useful. You were tolerated as long as you were obedient. Tonight, sitting here by the swinging kitchen doors while the servers rushed past with trays of filet mignon, I realized that sitting with the help was not a spontaneous insult. It was not a lapse in judgment. It was training. Daphne was teaching me my place in the corporate structure of the Hale family. I was not being hired as a partner. I was being hired as a subordinate. I was expected to be the woman who stayed in the background, who wrote the checks, who fixed the mistakes, who ensured the spotlight stayed firmly on the Hales while I operated the dimmer switch. They wanted my competence, but they did not want my voice. They wanted a bride who was grateful just to be in the room, even if she was sitting in the corner. A server paused by my table, looking embarrassed. He was a young guy, maybe 22, holding a pitcher of water. "Can I get you anything else, ma'am?" he asked, his voice low, recognizing that I did not belong there. "I am fine, thank you," I said, giving him a genuine smile. "Actually, keep the water coming. I have a feeling I am going to need to be hydrated." He nodded and hurried away. I watched Daphne tap her glass with a spoon to get the room's attention. She stood up, radiating that toxic benevolence she had perfected. "I just want to say how happy we are to have all our friends here," she announced. "To Graham, my beautiful boy, who is starting a new chapter, and to Mara, who has worked so hard to make sure our vision came to life." Our vision, not my vision, not Graham's and mine, hers. She raised her glass toward me in the back corner. The guests turned, craning their necks to look at the woman in the shadows. It was a power move disguised as a toast. She was forcing me to acknowledge her from a position of inferiority. I raised my water glass. I did not stand. I kept my face perfectly smooth, a mask of polite agreement. Inside, however, the gears were turning. I had spent a decade investigating corporate fraud. I knew how to recognize a hostile takeover when I saw one, and I knew that you do not win a war against a narcissist by fighting them with emotion. You do not scream. You do not cry. You do not appeal to their better nature, because they do not have one. You fight them with documentation. You fight them with contracts. You fight them with the one thing they respect more than blood: leverage. Daphne thought she had shunted me to the sidelines. She thought she had stripped me of my power by physically removing me from the head table, but she had made a critical error. She assumed that my power came from proximity to her. She did not realize that my power came from the fact that I was the only person in this entire equation who actually read the fine print. I set my glass down and reached for my phone. It sat on the white plastic tablecloth, a sleek black rectangle containing my entire arsenal. I unlocked the screen and navigated to my email. I found the folder labeled Wedding Contracts. I opened the PDF for the venue rental agreement. My thumb hovered over the document. I scrolled down to the signature page. There it was, clear as day. Mara Whitfield, not Graham Hale, not Daphne Hale, just me. I scrolled up to the clause regarding cancellations and changes. It was a standard force majeure contract, but with a specific addendum I had negotiated myself because I never signed anything without an exit strategy. It stated clearly that the signatory retained sole authority over the event details, including the right to alter the date or location within a 24-hour window given specific conditions of dissatisfaction with the service provider. Well, technically, the service provider had done nothing wrong, but the contract for the rehearsal dinner and the wedding ceremony were linked under one master agreement with the estate management company, and since I was the client, I had the right to make unilateral decisions. I looked up at Daphne, who was now laughing at something the cousin from Europe had said. She looked triumphant. She looked like a queen holding court. She had no idea that her reign was about to expire. I closed the PDF and locked my phone screen. The click sound was audible in the quiet space near the kitchen. It sounded like a deadbolt sliding home. I was not just a bride anymore. I was a collection agency, and the Hales were about to find out that their credit was no longer good here. I smoothed the napkin on my lap. I would eat my dinner. I would smile at the waiters. I would endure this humiliation for exactly 2 more hours, and then I would remind the Hale family that when you treat the person holding the checkbook like a servant, you should not be surprised when they decide to stop paying for your party. The anger I felt earlier had crystallized into something colder, sharper. It felt good. It felt familiar. It felt like work, and nobody did their work better than I did. The rehearsal dinner concluded not with a bang, but with the polite, suffocating murmur of socialites pretending nothing was wrong. I waited until the dessert course, a dry tiramisu that I had paid $12 a plate for, was finished. Daphne was holding court at the head table, recounting a story about a summer in the Hamptons that never actually happened, while Graham nodded along, his eyes glazed over. I did not storm the head table. I did not throw my wine in anyone's face. I simply stood up from my folding table near the kitchen, smoothed the skirt of my dress, and walked out the side door into the cool, salty night air of the harbor. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, the noise of the party vanished. I was alone in the parking lot, the gravel crunching softly under my heels. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and ocean brine. It was time to work. I pulled my phone from my clutch. My first call was not to Graham, nor to my parents. It was to the general manager of the venue we were currently standing in. It was 9 o'clock at night, but in the wedding industry, managers never truly sleep, especially when the client is spending $50,000. "Mr. Henderson," I said when he answered on the second ring. My voice was stripped of any bride-to-be jitteriness. It was the voice I used when informing a client that their assets were being frozen. "I need you to pull up the contract for tomorrow's ceremony and reception. Right now." There was a pause, the sound of typing, and then his confused voice. "Ms. Whitfield? Is everything all right? The staff said dinner is going well." "Just the contract, please," I said. "Clause 4, Section B, regarding the primary signatory, and the right to unilateral modification. "One moment," he said. I could hear the rustling of papers. "Okay, I have it. It says that the primary signatory retains full control over the event specifics, including vendor access and site usage, provided all fees are paid in full." "And who is the primary signatory, Mr. Henderson?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "You are Ms. Whitfield," he said. "Your name is on the bottom line. The credit card on file is yours." "And is there anyone else authorized to make changes? Any co-signers?" "No, ma'am. Mrs. Hale tried to add herself last week to adjust the menu, but as I told her then, policy dictates we only take instruction from the contract holder. Since you declined to add her, it is just you." I closed my eyes and let a small, dark smile touch my lips. The Hales' arrogance was their Achilles' heel. They had been so eager to avoid the tedious administrative work, so desperate to let me handle the logistics so they wouldn't have to dip into their own shallow pockets, that they had handed me the keys to the kingdom. They thought they were delegating a chore. In reality, they had signed over custody. "Thank you," I said. "I am exercising my right to cancel the usage of the venue for tomorrow's ceremony and reception, effective immediately." "Mr. Henderson choked. "Ms. Whitfield, the wedding is in 14 hours. The cancellation fees are 100%, I cut in. "I know. I wrote the check. Keep the money. Consider it a donation to your renovation fund. But I want the chairs folded, the flowers removed, and the doors locked by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. If anyone from the Hale family shows up trying to set up, you are to inform them that the event has been relocated by the client. If they cause a scene, you call the police. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear," he said, his voice trembling slightly. He did not ask why. He knew better. I hung up. Step 1 was complete. I had just burned $25,000 of my own money to make a point. It was an expensive point, but some lessons come with a high tuition. Now for step 2. In my line of work, we have a saying: only an amateur relies on a single plan. When I investigate a company, I always assume the first set of books is fake. When I plan a project, I always assume the first option will fail. 3 months ago, when Daphne started making snide comments about the venue choice, saying it was adequate but lacking historical gravitas, I had quietly made an inquiry elsewhere. I dialed a number I had saved under emergency logistics. It rang 4 times before a deep, cultured voice answered. "Ravenport Conservatory, this is Elias." "Elias, it is Mara Whitfield," I said. "I am activating the retainer." Ravenport Conservatory was a hidden gem about 20 minutes north of Seabriar. It was a massive, Victorian-era glasshouse filled with rare botanical specimens. Surrounded by high stone walls and private gardens, it was exclusive, expensive, and notoriously difficult to book. It was also completely private. Unlike the country club atmosphere of the current venue where members could wander by, Ravenport was a fortress. "Ms. Whitfield," Elias said, sounding delighted. "I wondered if we would be hearing from you. We have kept the date open as requested, just in case. The administrative hold fee you paid was quite persuasive." "I am transferring the full balance for the rental and the rush fee right now," I said, switching apps on my phone to my banking portal. "I need the grand atrium set up for 150 guests. White chairs, minimal decor. The plants are enough. And Elias?" "Yes?" "I am sending you a guest list within the hour. Security at the gate is to be absolute. If a name is not on my list, the gate does not open. I do not care if they say they are the groom's mother. I do not care if they claim to be the Queen of England. If they are not on the spreadsheet, they do not get in. We specialize in discretion, Ms. Whitfield," Elias assured me. "Your privacy is the product." I authorized the transfer. Another substantial sum vanished from my savings. The money I had put aside for a down payment on a house I realized I no longer wanted to buy with Graham. "Done," I said. "See you at 10 o'clock tomorrow." I lowered the phone. My hands were steady. My heart rate was normal. I walked back to my car, got in, and drove back to the hotel where Graham and I were staying. I did not go back inside the rehearsal dinner. I did not say goodbye. I simply vanished. When Graham stumbled into our hotel suite 3 hours later, smelling of bourbon and cigars, I was already in bed, reading a book on corporate litigation strategies. He stripped off his jacket and sat on the edge of the bed, looking at me with blurry, affectionate eyes. "You left early," he mumbled, reaching for my hand. "Mom was asking where you went. She thought maybe you were upset about the seating thing. I told her you were just tired." I pulled my hand away gently, marking my page in the book. I had work to do. Graham. Work? On the night before our wedding? He laughed, shaking his head. "You are always working, Mara. You need to relax. Mom is just being mom. She likes to control things. It is harmless." I looked at him, really looked at him. He was a good-looking man with a weak spine. He thought his mother's cruelty was a quirk because it had never been directed at him. He thought my humiliation was a compromise. "Go to sleep, Graham," I said softly. The next morning, the sun broke over the harbor with a brilliant, mocking cheerfulness. I was up at 6, fully dressed in a sharp white pantsuit while Graham was still snoring. I packed my bags. I packed his bags. When he finally woke up at 8, groggy and reaching for water, I was sitting in the armchair by the window, typing on my laptop. "Morning," he croaked. "What time is it? We need to be at the venue by 11 for photos." "We do not," I said, not looking up from the screen. "What?" He rubbed his face, sitting up. I stopped typing and turned the laptop chair to face him. "I changed the venue. Graham?" He froze. The water glass halted halfway to his mouth. "You... what?" "I canceled the booking at the Harbor Estate," I said. My voice was calm, factual. "The wedding is now at Ravenport Conservatory. The ceremony starts at the same time. The reception will follow immediately after." Graham stared at me. He looked like I had just spoken to him in a dead language. "You changed the venue? Today? The wedding is today. Mara, you cannot just change the venue." "I can," I said. "I signed the contract. I paid the bills. I have the authority." But my parents," he stammered, the color draining from his face. "Mom has already told everyone where to go. The vendors, the guests." "The vendors have already been redirected," I said. "I spent the last 2 hours on the phone with the caterer, the photographer, and the band. They are en route to Ravenport as we speak. As for the guests..." I hit the enter key on my laptop. "I just sent an email blast to the entire guest list," I said. "Subject line, updated ceremony logistics. It contains the new address and a digital pass for the security gate. It is done." "Mom is going to kill you," Graham whispered. It was his first thought. Not "why did you do this?" but "Mom will be angry." "She can try," I said, standing up and picking up my purse. "But she will have to get through security first. And Graham?" He looked up at me, wide-eyed, seeing a stranger in the woman he was about to marry. "If you want to get married today," I said, "you will get dressed, you will get in the car, and you will come to the place I chose. If you want to stay here and explain to your mother why you are sitting at an empty venue, that is your choice, but I am leaving in 5 minutes." I walked to the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I did not look back to see if he was following. I knew he would come, not because he was strong, but because he was terrified of a scene, and I had just created the biggest scene of his life. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification that the email had been successfully delivered to 150 recipients, including Daphne Hale. I smiled. The game had changed. The board had been flipped, and for the first time since I met the Hale family, I was the one deciding where everyone sat. The silence inside my SUV was thick enough to choke on. Graham sat in the passenger seat, his knuckles white as he gripped the door handle, staring straight ahead as if the road to Ravenport Conservatory was leading us to a public execution rather than our wedding. My phone, mounted on the dashboard, lit up. It was the 5th time in 3 minutes. The screen flashed the name Daphne Hale against a background photo of her smiling with a glass of Chardonnay, a photo I had taken of course. You should answer it, Graham said, his voice tight. She is not going to stop. I know, I said, keeping my eyes on the winding coastal road. I am waiting for the voicemail. It gives me a record of her tone. Documentation is key. Graham. The ringing stopped, and then, almost instantly, started again. I sighed and tapped the speakerphone icon. I needed Graham to hear this. I needed him to hear it without his mother's physical presence there to cow him into submission. Mara! Daphne's voice filled the car. It was not the screech of a banshee. That would have been too honest. It was a terrifyingly low, sweet coo, the kind of voice one uses to talk a jumper off a ledge, laced with a venom that only family could detect. Mara, darling, are you having a mental health episode? We are all very concerned. I merged onto the highway, keeping the speedometer steady at 55 miles per hour. I am perfectly fine. Daphne, I am driving to the wedding venue. I assume you received the email with the updated coordinates. The email? She let out a sharp, breathless laugh. Yes, we received your little memo, Mara, sweetheart. Listen to me closely. You are confused. The stress has clearly gotten to you. We are at the harbor estate. The guests are arriving here. The flowers are here. You need to turn that car around right now and stop this tantrum before it becomes a tragedy. It is not a tantrum, I said, my voice flat and professional. It is a correction. I found the seating arrangements at the harbor estate to be unsatisfactory for the primary stakeholder, so I relocated the asset. The primary stakeholder? Daphne's voice dropped an octave, losing some of the sweetness. I am the mother of the groom. I am the matriarch of this family. I decide what is satisfactory. Do you have any idea how this looks? You are making the Hales look disorganized. You are making us look common. Better disorganized than disrespectful, I replied. Disrespectful? Daphne snapped. Because of a table? You are blowing up an entire alliance because of a table? Oh, grow up. Mara, you were doing a job. We needed you to manage the staff. It was a compliment to your skill set. Beside me, Graham flinched. He looked out the window, unable to look at the dashboard. The venue is Ravenport Conservatory, I said. The ceremony begins at 1 o'clock. The gate code is in the email. If you want to see your son get married, I suggest you start driving. It is a lovely route. Do not dare dictate my schedule to me, Daphne hissed. Listen to me, you ungrateful girl. If you do not turn around and bring the wedding back to where I said it would be, I am pulling the funding. Do you hear me? I will cancel the checks for the reception. I will cancel the honeymoon. I will make sure you pay for every single napkin yourself. I almost laughed. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep my composure. She was threatening to pull funding that did not exist. I had seen the Hale family accounts. I knew exactly how leveraged they were. The funding she spoke of was likely a credit line that was already maxed out, or a promise of a check that would take 3 weeks to clear. That is fine. Daphne, I said, I have already covered the costs. You can keep your money. I prefer to own the equity in my own wedding. There was a stunned silence on the other end. She had tried to hold the purse strings over my head, not realizing I had brought my own bank vault. And another thing, Daphne continued, her voice trembling with rage now. If you move this wedding, the senator will not come. Neither will the board of directors from the Meridian Group. They do not travel to unvetted locations on a whim. You are stripping this event of its VIPs. You are ruining Graham's networking opportunities. Graham is getting married. Daphne, he is not launching a product. If the senator cannot drive 20 minutes to wish him well, then the senator is not a friend. Put Graham on the phone, she commanded. I glanced at Graham. He looked pale. He is right here. Graham, Daphne shouted. Tell your fiancé to stop this madness. Tell her to turn around. We are standing here with the florist, and she looks ready to faint. Fix this, Graham. Be a man and fix this. Graham swallowed hard. He looked at the phone, then at me. Mom, the harbor estate. They said the contract is canceled. The chairs are already gone. There is nothing there. Then bring them back, she screamed, the facade finally cracking completely. Make her fix it. She is your wife. Control her. I reached out and tapped the red button. The call ended. The silence returned, but this time it was vibrating with the aftershocks of her explosion. Before I could speak, my phone pinged, then pinged again, then a continuous stream of vibrations buzzed against the dashboard mount. Tessa, Graham muttered, recognizing the pattern. I glanced at the notifications cascading down the screen. Tessa Hale. Are you insane? Tessa Hale. I just posted the location on my story. Now I have to delete it? Do you know how bad that looks for my engagement metrics? Tessa Hale. Mom is crying, literally crying. You are a monster. Tessa Hale. We are not coming. I swear to God. Mara, if you don't send an apology blast to the guest list in 5 minutes, we are boycotting. Tessa Hale. Who do you think you are? You are ruining my brother's life. I did not reply to Tessa. I did not have the energy to explain to a 30-year-old woman that a wedding was not a content creation opportunity. I simply typed one message into the family group chat, which included Daphne, Tessa, Graham, and Graham's quiet, defeated father. I chose a place that respects me. The gate closes at 12:45. I put the phone on silent. Mara, Graham said softly. Yes? Was that really necessary? He turned in his seat to face me, his expression pleading. I mean, I get it. I do. Mom was rude yesterday. But this? Changing the whole venue? Making them drive to a new place? It has humiliated them. Mara, you are publicly humiliating them. I signaled and changed lanes, passing a slow-moving truck. They tried to make me sit next to the kitchen. Graham, at my own rehearsal dinner. They told 50 people that I belonged with the hired help. Was that not public humiliation? It was a mistake, Graham argued, though his voice lacked conviction. Mom she does not think. She gets focused on the logistics, and she forgets feelings. But she loves us. She is paying for... He stopped, remembering what I had just said on the phone. Wait, did you say you paid for everything? Every cent, I said. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the band, even your tuxedo rental. Graham, I paid it 2 weeks ago when the card your mother gave the tailor was declined. Graham went silent. He stared at his hands. I did not know that. You did not want to know that, I corrected him. You wanted to believe the fairy tale that your family is a benevolent empire, but empires require gold, Graham, and your family is mining fool's gold. But you can't just cut them out, he said, his voice rising with desperation. They are my family. You are making me choose between my wife and my mother. I pulled the car onto the exit ramp that led toward the secluded woods surrounding Ravenport. I slowed the car down and looked him in the eye for a brief second before turning back to the road. I am not making you choose. Graham, I am setting a standard. If you want me to be the woman who sits by the trash cans while your mother holds court, then you are in the wrong car. You should get out and walk back to the Harbor Estate. But if you want to be my husband, if you want a partner who will build a real life with you, then you need to accept that I will never, ever let anyone treat me like an employee in my own marriage again. But can't you just apologize? He asked, the words tumbling out in a panic. Just a small one? Say it was a misunderstanding? Just to keep the peace? Mom will calm down if you just give her a little win. Please, Mara, just for me. I felt a crack in my heart. It was a small fracture, but deep. It was the realization that Graham was not malicious, but he was weak, and in the world I operated in, the world of risk assessment and high-stakes negotiation, weakness was more dangerous than malice. A malicious enemy you can predict. A weak ally will open the gate for the enemy just to stop the banging on the door. If you want me to sit with the help and call it family, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream, then you can marry anyone you want, Graham, but you cannot marry me. Graham slumped back in his seat. He looked out the window at the passing trees, the realization finally sinking in. He had thought this was a spat. He had thought this was wedding stress. He was finally understanding that this was a revolution. We pulled up to the massive iron gates of Ravenport Conservatory. The security team I had hired was already there, checking a clipboard. They waved my car through, recognizing the license plate. I parked the SUV in the private lot reserved for the bridal party. It was empty, save for the caterer's van and the florist's truck. The silence here was different. It was peaceful. It was mine. "Go inside," I told Graham. "The groom's suite is on the west wing. There is whiskey there. Take a shower. Put on your suit. Decide if you are a husband or a son." Graham opened the door. He paused, one foot on the pavement. He looked like he wanted to say something, to defend them one last time, but the look on my face stopped him. He got out and walked toward the building, his shoulders hunched. I stayed in the car. I needed a moment. I opened my laptop bag, which I had placed in the back seat. I pulled out my slim silver computer and booted it up. The startup chime was a comfort. I navigated to my secure drive. I found the folder I had created 6 months ago, the one I had hoped I would never have to use, the one I had built late at night, cross-referencing public records, shell company registrations, and tax liens. I clicked on the folder labeled Hale Due Diligence. It opened to reveal a cascade of subfolders: Meridian Shoreline Holdings, Tax Discrepancies, 2020 to 2023, Unauthorized Property Liens, and one file simply named The Seabrier Land Deal. I looked at the files. The Hales thought they were threatening me with money and social standing. They thought they could bully me because they believed I was just a girl who was good at math. They did not understand that I had not just organized their wedding, I had audited their life. Daphne had threatened to ruin me. Tessa had threatened to boycott me. I moved the cursor over the file named The Seabrier Land Deal. "Okay," I whispered to the empty car. "Let's see who really owns the ground we are standing on." I closed the laptop, but I did not put it away. I kept it on the passenger seat, right where Graham had been sitting. It was my partner now, and unlike Graham, it never flinched when things got ugly. I sat in the silence of my car, the leather seat warm against my back, the hum of the laptop fan the only sound in the world. People often misunderstand the nature of what I do. When a woman says she looked into her partner's history, society calls her jealous, insecure, or crazy. They imagine her scrolling through Instagram likes or checking text messages for a secret lover. I do not care about secret lovers. Lovers are a temporary variable. I care about solvency. I care about liability. I care about the structural integrity of the life I am about to contractually bind myself to. I did not start a file on the Hale family because I was suspicious of Graham's fidelity. I started it because of a comment Daphne made 6 months ago over a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc that cost $80. We were sitting on their terrace, discussing the rising property taxes in Seabrier Harbor. Graham's father had grumbled about the assessment, and Daphne had waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Oh, hush, Robert," she had said, laughing lightly. "You know the Hale Meridian Group always knows how to soften the numbers when it counts. It is all about how you frame the asset." Softening the numbers. To a layperson, that sounds like clever accounting. To a risk investigator, that sounds like fraud. That single phrase was the pebble that started the landslide. That night, I went home and did what I do for every major client at Northgate Integrity Partners. I ran a background check on the corporate entity. On my laptop screen, the file tree for Hale. Due diligence stared back at me. I opened the subfolder titled Corporate Structure. The Hale Meridian Group presented itself as a pillar of the community, a real estate development firm that had shaped the skyline of Seabrier Harbor for 3 generations. Their website featured glossy photos of Graham's grandfather shaking hands with mayors and governors. But websites are marketing, not legal documents. I clicked on a PDF I had downloaded from the Secretary of State's business registry. On the surface, Hale Meridian Group looked clean. They filed their annual reports, they paid their licensing fees, but when I looked at their list of assets, I noticed a pattern. Every time they acquired a major property, they did not hold it directly. They transferred the title within 90 days to a series of LLCs, limited liability companies. This is standard practice for liability protection. I did not fault them for that, but when I cross-referenced the addresses of these LLCs, I found something interesting. I opened the document labeled Meridian Shoreline Holdings. This company was registered 3 years ago. Its principal address was a post office box in a strip mall 3 towns over. Its registered agent was not the Hales' usual high-powered attorney, but a man named Thomas P. O'Malley. I had looked him up, too. He was Daphne's second cousin, a man who had declared bankruptcy in 2015 and currently worked as a golf instructor. Why would a multi-million-dollar real estate empire entrust a key holding company to a bankrupt golf instructor? I scrolled down to the transaction history I had compiled. Meridian Shoreline. Holdings had purchased 3 parcels of waterfront land in 2021. The purchase price recorded was $1.2 million. That seemed low for the market, but not illegal. However, 6 months later, Meridian Shoreline Holdings sold those same 3 parcels back to a subsidiary of the Hale Meridian Group. The sale price? $4.5 million. I leaned back in my seat, staring at the numbers. They had sold the land to themselves. They used a shell company to inflate the value of the asset by over 300% in under a year, without doing any significant development on the land. Why? I opened the next tab, Lending Agreements. 1 month after that internal sale, the Hale Meridian Group used that land, now valued on paper at $4.5 million, as collateral to secure a construction loan from a regional bank. They borrowed $3 million against it. It was a classic churn. They were manufacturing equity out of thin air to borrow real money. They were living on debt that was secured by a lie, and if the market corrected, or if the bank realized the land was really only worth $1 million, the loan would be called in, and the house of cards would collapse. This was not just softening the numbers, this was bank fraud. But that was not the piece of information that made my blood run cold. Bank fraud takes time to prove, and banks have their own lawyers. I needed something more immediate. I needed something that proved the Hales were not just crooks, but hypocrites who were broke. I navigated to the folder labeled the Seabriar Marina Complex. This was the crown jewel. The Hales loved to talk about the marina. It was a boutique shopping and dining complex right on the water. Daphne held her charity luncheons there. Graham had proposed to me on the pier. They acted as if they owned the very water that lapped against the pilings. I pulled up the title search I had performed 2 nights ago. The deed was indeed in the name of the Hale Family Trust, but there was a lien on it. Usually, liens are from banks, mortgage liens, construction liens. But this lien was different. It was a private lien, filed by a private equity firm based in Delaware called Apex Capital Solutions. The amount of the lien was $750,000. The date of the filing was 18 months ago. I had dug deeper into Apex Capital Solutions. They were what is politely known in the finance world as a distressed asset lender. Less politely, they are known as hard money sharks. You only go to a place like Apex when the banks have cut you off. You go to them when your credit score is in the gutter and you need cash desperately to cover payroll or perhaps to fund a lavish lifestyle that you can no longer afford. The interest rate on the note was 12%. I did the math in my head. If they had not paid the principal, the interest alone was compounding at a rate that would eat them alive. And here was the kicker. I had found a notice of default filed in the county clerk's office just last week. It had not been processed into the public searchable database yet, which is why no one in town knew. I only found it because I paid a courier $50 to physically go to the clerk's office and pull the physical file for the property. The Hales were in default. They were not just liquidating some assets for a new venture, as Daphne had claimed when she asked me to pay for the rehearsal dinner. They were broke. They were drowning. They were one legal motion away from losing the marina, the symbol of their prestige. And yet, Daphne had stood there in her champagne silk dress, looking down her nose at me, treating me like the help. She had tried to humiliate the only person in the room who could actually afford to buy her dinner. She was playing queen of the castle while the repo men were idling the engines of their trucks just outside the moat. I felt a surge of adrenaline, sharp and electric. This was why I did not scream yesterday. This was why I did not flip the table. Emotional outbursts are messy and easily dismissed. She is just hysterical, they would say. She is overreacting. But you cannot dismiss a notice of default. You cannot gaslight a foreclosure proceeding. I could have revealed this yesterday. I could have thrown the papers on the table during the rehearsal dinner, but it would have been messy. Graham would have defended her out of reflex. The guests would have been confused. Daphne would have spun a story about a clerical error or a misunderstanding with the accountants. She is a master of spin. I needed a bigger stage. I needed a moment where the spin would not work. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 10:15 in the morning. The ceremony would start at 1. The reception would follow. The reception, that was the moment. The Hales loved an audience. Daphne lived for the toasts, for the speeches, for the moment when all eyes were on her family's benevolence and grandeur. She wanted a spotlight? I would give her a spotlight. I would give her a spotlight so bright it would burn the facade right off her face. I closed the Seabrier Marina file and clicked on one last document. It was a draft email I had prepared to the compliance officer at the regional bank that held the construction loan, the one secured by the inflated land value. I had not sent it yet. Sending it would trigger a federal investigation. It would freeze their assets. It would likely send someone to prison. I was not ready to send it yet. That was the nuclear option. That was for option B. For today, I just needed the truth about the debt. I needed them to see that I knew. My laptop pinged with a new email notification. I minimized the File Explorer and opened my mail client. It was an automated message from a service called Verify ID. Subject: Verification complete. Inquiry number 8492. Body: Dear Ms. Whitfield, the background verification regarding the tax filings for the entity, Meridian Shoreline Holdings, has been completed. Please access the secure portal to view the discrepancies noted in fiscal year 2022. I smiled. The final nail in the coffin had just arrived. The tax filings did not match the loan applications. They told the bank they were making millions. They told the IRS they were losing money. It was the oldest trick in the book, and they were arrogant enough to think no one would ever cross-reference the two. I clicked the link, downloaded the report, and dragged it into the Hale due diligence folder. Not hot, I whispered to myself, repeating the mantra of my mentor at Northgate. Not hasty, just on time. I shut the laptop lid with a firm snap. I placed it back in my bag and zipped it shut. I looked out at the Ravenport Conservatory. The glass structure gleamed in the sunlight. A beautiful, transparent cage. It was a place where nothing could be hidden. It was perfect. I checked my makeup in the rearview mirror. My lipstick was red, a shade called Power Suit. My eyes were clear. I did not look like a woman who had spent the night researching shell companies. I looked like a bride. I opened the car door and stepped out onto the pavement. The air was crisp. I could hear the distant sound of the ocean, the same ocean the Hales claimed to own. I walked toward the building to put on my white dress. I was going to marry Graham. I loved him enough to try to save him, but saving him meant destroying the illusion that had kept him a child for 32 years. Today, I would not just be saying, I do, I would be serving notice. Ravenport Conservatory was not just a wedding venue, it was a fortress of glass and steel, bathed in the soft, diffused light of the early afternoon sun. Standing in the bridal suite, which was actually a repurposed orchid nursery with high ceilings and walls of lush greenery, I felt a strange sense of calm. At the Harbor Estate, I had felt like a guest at my own execution. Here, I was the architect. I adjusted the pearl earring in my left lobe, staring at my reflection in the vintage floor-to-length mirror. The woman looking back at me did not look like a bride who had just upended a $50,000 event on 6 hours' notice. She looked like a CEO closing a merger. The venue change had served its primary purpose. It had reset the board. At the old venue, The staff answered to the Hale name because the Hales had been patrons there for 30 years. Here, the staff answered to the signature on the check, and that signature was mine. I had given the security team at the front gate a strict directive. The guest list was final. No plus ones that had not been cleared, no surprise cousins, and absolutely no vendors that I had not personally vetted. I watched from the window of the suite as the cars began to arrive. I saw the confused looks on the faces of the Hale relatives as they navigated the winding driveway, but I also saw their awe. Ravenport was objectively more beautiful than the stuffy harbor estate. It felt modern. It felt alive. My phone buzzed on the vanity table. It was not a frantic text from Tessa this time, but a notification from my email server. I had sent the ceremony update blast at 8 o'clock that morning. I had worded it with the precision of a press release. I did not blame the Hales. I did not mention the seating chart. I simply stated that, due to unforeseen logistical improvements, the ceremony and reception have been upgraded to the historic Ravenport Conservatory to better accommodate our guests' comfort. It was perfect. It was polite, and it completely handcuffed Daphne. If she complained, she would look ungrateful. If she tried to tell people I was crazy, they would look around at this stunning botanical garden and wonder what she was talking about. I walked out of the suite and made my way to the main atrium to check the setup before the ceremony began. The air smelled of jasmine and damp earth, a welcome change from the stale potpourri of the country club. I spotted Daphne near the entrance. She was wearing a hat that was slightly too large, perhaps to hide the fact that her face was tight with suppressed rage. She was cornering her sister-in-law, Aunt Sarah, by a display of ferns. I slowed my pace, moving silently over the stone floor, and caught the tail end of her whisper. "It is just so erratic, Sarah," Daphne was saying, her hand fluttering to her chest. "She did not even consult me. I love the girl, but she is clearly unstable. Who changes a venue the morning of? It is a slap in the face to tradition. I am just worried about Graham. He is marrying into chaos." Aunt Sarah looked concerned, nodding sympathetically. "It is a bit odd, Daphne, but the place is lovely." "It is not about the place," Daphne hissed. "It is about the principle. She thinks she can just take over. She is trying to erase us." I stepped into view. "Good afternoon. Daphne? Aunt Sarah?" Daphne jumped. The mask of the grieving matriarch slammed back into place instantly. "Mara, there you are. We were just saying how interesting this all is." "I am glad you made it," I said, my voice warm and devoid of sarcasm. "I know the drive is a little longer, but I think you will find the acoustics here are much better for the vows, and I wanted to make sure everything was perfect for the families." I gestured to a large round table set up near the entrance to the aisle. It was draped in heavy velvet and covered in framed photographs. "What is this?" Daphne asked, eyeing the table suspiciously. "It is the heritage table," I explained. "I set it up this morning. I wanted to honor the people who made today possible." I watched as Daphne walked over to it. I had placed a large, silver-framed photo of Graham's grandparents right in the center. Next to it was a beautiful candid shot of Daphne and her husband from their own wedding day, looking young and happy. Flanking them were pictures of my parents, who were currently smiling at guests near the bar. It was a shrine to family history. It was respectful. It was elegant. And it completely destroyed Daphne's narrative that I was an arrogant outsider trying to erase the Hales. "Oh," Aunt Sarah said, touching the frame of Daphne's wedding photo. "Look at that. Daphne, you looked gorgeous. That is such a thoughtful touch. Mara?" Daphne looked at the photo, then at me. Her jaw worked silently. She could not criticize me now. She could not say I was disrespectful when I had literally put her face on a pedestal at the entrance of my wedding. "It is very nice," Daphne managed to choke out. "Thank you, Mara." "You are welcome," I said, leaning in slightly so only she could hear. "I believe in giving credit where it is due, Daphne, just like I believe in paying debts." Her eyes narrowed, trying to decipher if that was a threat, but I was already turning away to greet another guest. I found Graham in the groomsmen's holding area. He was nursing a glass of sparkling water, looking pale but cleaner than he had in the car. When he saw me, he stood up straight. "You look—" He stopped, his eyes sweeping over my dress. It was a simple, architectural gown with no lace, no beads, just clean lines and silk. "You look incredible, Mara." "Thank you," I said, reaching out to straighten his tie. "How are you holding up?" "Mom is furious," he whispered, leaning into my touch. "She is smiling, but I know the look. She is going to make us pay for this later." "Let her be furious," I said calmly. "Anger is just energy. Graham, we can redirect it, or we can ignore it, but we are not going to let it rule us today." "I saw the table outside," he said softly. "With the pictures. That was really classy. Mara, after yesterday, I would have burned her picture, not framed it." "I am not her, Graham," I said, looking him in the eyes. "I do not fight with humiliation. I fight with facts. And the fact is, she is your mother. She deserves a seat. She just does not deserve the driver's seat." Graham nodded, taking a deep breath. For the first time in 48 hours, he looked like he might actually believe me. Okay, we can do this." Just then, the door to the holding area burst open. Tessa marched in, her phone clutched in her hand like a grenade. "There you are," she exclaimed, ignoring Graham and zeroing in on me. "Mara, we need to talk. Now." "Hello, Tessa," I said. "You look lovely." "Cut the crap," she snapped. She lowered her voice, glancing at the groomsmen who were pretending to be busy with their cufflinks. "Look, I just got off the phone with the manager at the Harbor Estate. They haven't broken down the tables yet. If we leave now, right now, we can still salvage this." I stared at her. "Salvage what, exactly?" "The vibe," Tessa said, waving her hands. "This place it is weird. It is a greenhouse, and Mom is upset. She is literally in the bathroom right now reapplying her mascara because she has been crying. Mara, be reasonable. If we move back to the Harbor Estate, Mom promised she would let you sit at the head table. She said she will even have them bring in a special chair for you, just to keep the peace." I looked at Tessa, and then I looked at Graham. Graham looked at his sister with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. "Tessa," Graham said, "stop." "I am trying to help you," Tessa argued. "Do you want Mom to be miserable on your wedding day?" I stepped forward. "Tessa, listen to me. We are not going back. The guests are here. The music is starting in 10 minutes. And as for the head table," I smiled, a genuine, amused smile. "I do not need your mother to let me sit anywhere. I bought the table. I bought the chairs. I bought the roof over your head right now. I do not need permission to occupy space that I own." "You are being so difficult," Tessa huffed, crossing her arms. "Why does it matter so much? It is just a venue." "It is not about the venue, Tessa," I said softly. "It is about the precedent. I like this place, and I like the new rules. The rule is simple. If you respect me, you are welcome. If you try to negotiate my dignity, you are not." Tessa opened her mouth to argue, but the sound of the string quartet tuning up drifted in from the atrium. The wedding march was about to begin. She let out a frustrated groan, spun on her heel, and stomped out. Graham looked at the closing door, then back at me. "New rules," he repeated, testing the words. "New rules," I confirmed. I left him to finish getting ready and walked back toward the bridal suite to grab my bouquet. The adrenaline was humming in my veins now, steady and strong. The venue change had worked. It had thrown them off balance. They were scrambling to regain control, offering me petty concessions like a seat at a table, unaware that the entire ground beneath them was shifting. They thought the venue change was my revenge. They thought this was the climax of my rebellion. They were asking themselves, is this it? Is this the big play? She made us drive 20 minutes? They had no idea. I entered the quiet of the bridal suite and walked to my bag. My phone was ringing. I picked it up, The caller ID displayed the name of a private courier service I used for sensitive documents. "This is Mara," I answered. "Ms. Whitfield," the voice on the other end said. "I am just confirming delivery. The package you requested from the printer has been dropped off with your event coordinator. It is marked for the presentation." "And the other document?" I asked. "The one for the signature?" "Yes, ma'am. It is in the blue folder. Just as you asked. It is ready for you to sign whenever you are ready to execute." "Thank you," I said. "You have been very helpful." I hung up the phone. I looked at the blue folder tucked into the side pocket of my laptop bag. Inside were the papers that would formally transfer the leverage I had found into a weapon I could use. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was something far more binding. I checked my reflection one last time. The bride was ready, the groom was waiting, and the Hales were sitting in the front row, smiling their plastic smiles, thinking they had survived the storm. I picked up my bouquet of white calla lilies. "Showtime," I whispered. I walked out of the suite and toward the aisle. The music swelled. The doors opened. And as I stepped into the light, I saw Daphne Hale turn in her seat to look at me. She gave me a tight, condescending little nod, the kind you give a child who has finally stopped throwing a tantrum. I smiled back, a real, radiant smile, because I knew something she did not. I knew that by the time the cake was cut, she would never look down on me again. The ceremony was over. The vows had been spoken, the rings exchanged, and for a brief moment under the glass ceiling of the Ravenport Conservatory, the world had felt perfect. Graham had looked at me with tears in his eyes, and I had promised to love him. I meant it. But as we walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, the reality of the war I was fighting came rushing back the moment I saw Daphne's face. She was smiling, but it was a brittle thing, like a crack in a windshield that was about to shatter. We moved into the reception area, a stunning courtyard surrounded by tropical ferns and soft amber lighting. The air was filled with the sound of jazz and the murmur of guests impressed by the venue change. But while the guests were admiring the orchids, I was watching the perimeter. I knew Daphne would not take the venue change lying down. She was a woman who viewed control as oxygen. Without it, she suffocated. I had cut off her supply, and she was gasping. I knew she would try to find a way to reassert her dominance, to prove that even in my venue, she was the one pulling the strings. It happened 20 minutes into the cocktail hour. I was standing near the bar, sipping sparkling water and accepting congratulations from a cousin, when my lead photographer, a talented man named Marcus, approached me. He looked uncomfortable. "Ms. Whitfield," Marcus said, lowering his voice, "I am sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know your mother-in-law just cornered me by the buffet." I turned to face him fully. "What did she want, Marcus?" "She told me that the shot list had changed," he said, shifting his weight. "She said that for the reception, I was to focus exclusively on the Hale family table and the VIP guests," she points out. "She specifically told me not to waste film on, well, she called them the peripheral guests, meaning your family, I assume." I felt a cold flash of anger, but I tamped it down instantly. "And what did she say when you refused?" "She didn't wait for me to refuse," Marcus continued. "She told me that if I did not follow her instructions, she would ensure I never worked in this town again. She said the Hale family makes or breaks careers here." "And then?" "And then I told her that my contract is with you," Marcus said, a small, triumphant smile touching his lips. "I told her that unless the instruction comes from Mara Whitfield, I am shooting the wedding as planned. She didn't take it well. She looked like she wanted to slap the camera out of my hands." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "Continue as planned, and if she approaches you again, please record the interaction, for quality assurance." He nodded and melted back into the crowd. I looked across the room. Daphne was standing with Tessa, gesturing wildly with a champagne flute. Tessa looked pale. She was scrolling through her phone, likely checking her social media feeds, but she looked terrified. I walked over to them. I did not rush. I moved with the slow, inevitable momentum of a glacier. Is there a problem? I asked as I reached them. Daphne spun around. Her eyes were bright with malice. You, she hissed, though she kept her voice low enough to avoid a scene. You think you are so clever, moving us here, but you have embarrassed us. Mara, you have made us look like nomads. The guests seem happy, I said, gesturing to the room. And the photographer is doing a wonderful job capturing the joy, unless, of course, you tried to fire him for doing his job? Daphne's mouth opened and closed. She was not used to being called out on her maneuvers in real time. I was merely giving him creative direction. He was focusing too much on irrelevant people. My parents are not irrelevant, Daphne, I said, and neither am I. Tessa stepped forward, her voice trembling. Mara, please, just stop. Mom is just trying to help. Why do you have to be so cold? You are acting like this is a business transaction. I looked at Tessa. She was wearing a designer dress that I knew cost $4,000, bought with money from a trust fund that was currently hemorrhaging value. She was a child playing dress-up in a burning house. It is not a business transaction, Tessa, I said. It is a boundary. You are used to people folding because they are afraid of your mother's temper or her checkbook. I am afraid of neither, and that scares you, doesn't it? Tessa blinked, stepping back. She had never seen me like this. She had only known the Mara who nodded and fixed spreadsheets. She did not know how to handle a Mara who held the line. You are ruining everything, Tessa whispered, but there was no heat in it, only fear. I walked away from them and found Graham. He was standing by the edge of the dance floor, watching his mother. He looked like a man waking up from a long coma. She tried to bully the photographer, Graham said as I approached. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on Daphne. She did, I confirmed. She told him to ignore your family, Graham said. It was a statement, not a question. I heard her. I was standing right behind the ice sculpture. She didn't see me. She called your parents peripheral. I know, I said. Graham turned to me. His face was a mask of pain. I thought it was just stress. I thought she was just a perfectionist. But she is not, is she? She actually believes that we are better than everyone else. She believes she owns people. She believes she owns you, I said softly. She thinks that because you are a Hale, you are an extension of her will. And she thinks that because I married you, I am now an employee she can assign to the back of the room. Graham looked down at his wedding ring. It was a simple gold band. I don't want to be owned, Mara. Then don't be, I said. I love you. Graham, I married you because I see the man you can be when you are not suffocated by them. But you need to know something. I will never sign a peace treaty that requires my submission. I will be your wife. I will be your partner. But I will not be a servant to the Hale family delusions. I am not signing up for slavery. Graham nodded slowly. I know. I see that now. Good, I said, because things might get difficult before the night is over, and I need to know whose side you are on. I am on your side, he said. He took my hand and squeezed it. I am on our side. I squeezed back, but I did not tell him everything. Not yet. I did not tell him about the file that was currently sitting in the safe in the bridal suite. I had brought it with me. It was my insurance policy. Earlier that morning, while verifying the final details of the venue change, I had done one last sweep of the documents I had uncovered. I had focused on a specific asset that Daphne loved to brag about. The Hale family cottage at the vineyard. It wasn't really a cottage. It was a sprawling estate that they used for summer parties. They acted as if it had been in the family for 100 years. Daphne constantly talked about preserving the legacy of the estate. But the documents I had found told a different story. 3 years ago, to cover the losses from a failed development project in the city, Daphne had quietly transferred the title of the vineyard estate to a shell corporation, Meridian Shoreline Holdings, and then sold the equity to a private lender. Technically, the Hales did not own the cottage anymore. They were renting it back from the lender at an exorbitant rate to keep up appearances. But that was not the crime. The crime was in the loan application for the Seabriar Marina. In that application, signed by Daphne herself just 6 months ago. She had listed the vineyard estate as a free and clear asset to secure the loan. She had pledged collateral she did not own. That is called fraud. It is a felony. It carries a prison sentence of up to 30 years. I did not need to make anything up. I did not need to exaggerate. I had the deed transfer. I had the loan application with her signature. I had the date stamps. The ink was dry, and the trap was set. I had printed the documents out. They were in a thick manila envelope, sealed with red tape. I had placed it in the small safe in the bridal suite, right next to my change of shoes. I had taken a Sharpie and written a label on the front of the envelope, "Open only if they push." I watched Daphne across the room. She was regaining her composure, laughing loudly at a joke made by the senator, who had arrived late but made a show of kissing her ring. She looked powerful. She looked untouchable. She had no idea that I held the paper that could turn her from a matriarch into a defendant in a heartbeat. I did not want to use it. I wanted this wedding to end peacefully. I wanted to drive away with Graham and start our life. I wanted the Hales to just behave. But looking at Daphne, seeing the glint in her eye as she scanned the room for her next target, I knew that was a fantasy. She was not going to stop. She was going to push. She was going to try to ruin this reception because she couldn't stand that I had won the first round. I took a sip of my water. "Let's go dance," I said to Graham. "We have a reception to enjoy." "And Mom?" he asked, looking over his shoulder. "Let her play her games," I said, guiding him toward the dance floor. "If she breaks the rules, I have the whistle." We walked onto the floor for our first dance. The music was soft and romantic, but my mind was not on the melody. It was on the safe in the other room, and the bomb ticking silently inside it. I hoped I wouldn't have to detonate it, but I was a risk investigator. My job was to prepare for the worst-case scenario. And Daphne Hale was the worst-case scenario walking in high heels. The late afternoon sun filtered through the high, Victorian glass panels of the Ravenport Conservatory, bathing the entire reception space in a golden, ethereal glow. It was, objectively, a perfect scene. I had chosen white wisteria to hang from the iron rafters, creating a canopy of delicate blooms that swayed gently in the climate-controlled breeze. The tables were set with Belgian linen and crystal that caught the light like crushed diamonds. A jazz trio played a soft, sophisticated rendition of a classic standard in the corner. To an outsider, it looked like a fairy tale. To me, it looked like a battlefield where the lines had been drawn in silk and silver. I held Graham's hand as we made our entrance, the applause of 150 guests washing over us. Graham was beaming. The stress of the morning seemed to have evaporated for him, replaced by the genuine, overwhelming emotion of the ceremony. He squeezed my hand, leaning in to kiss my temple. "You did this," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. "It is beautiful, Mara. Thank you." I smiled up at him, and for a moment, the armor I had been wearing all day softened. "I did it for us," I said, and I meant it. But then my eyes scanned the room and landed on table 1. The seating chart had been my first declaration of independence. At the Harbor Estate, Daphne had designed a layout that resembled a royal court. There was to be a massive head table on a dais, where she, her husband, Tessa, and the key members of the Hale family would sit flanking Graham and me. My parents were relegated to a table near the kitchen door, supposedly because it was quieter there. Here, at Ravenport, I had instituted a new geometry. There was no dais. There was no long table for the Hales to preside over. Instead, I had set up a sweetheart table for just Graham and me, a small, intimate island in the center of the room. The rest of the tables were arranged in concentric circles around us. I had placed my parents at table 1, directly to our right. I had placed the Hale family at table 2, directly to our left. It was equitable, it was symmetrical, it was fair, and I knew Daphne would hate it with every fiber of her being. As the applause died down and guests began to take their seats, I saw the moment Daphne realized what had happened. She walked toward the front of the room, her chin held high, leading her husband like a prize show dog. She scanned the area near the sweetheart table. looking for the long, imposing banquet table she was accustomed to. She stopped. She blinked. She looked at the small table for two, and then at the round tables on either side. She did not sit down. Instead, she turned and signaled to the event captain, a patient woman named Elena, whom I had briefed extensively. I saw Daphne point imperiously at table 1, where my mother and father were already seated, chatting happily with an aunt. I gently disengaged my hand from Graham's and walked over before Elena could be verbally flayed. "Is something wrong, Daphne?" I asked, my voice projecting just enough to cut through the low hum of conversation. Daphne whipped around. Her smile was tight, her eyes wide with feigned confusion. "Mara, darling, there seems to be a mix-up. The staff has seated your parents at the primary table, and I cannot seem to find the groom's honor table." "The groom's honor table?" I repeated, tilting my head slightly. "Yes," Daphne said, her voice rising. She wanted an audience. She wanted the guests to stop and look, to see that a mistake had been made. "The table for the groom's family, the one that anchors the room. Surely you did not forget to assign a place of distinction for the people paying for—" She caught herself, remembering that she was not, in fact, paying for anything. "For the family that raised him." A hush fell over the nearby tables. People were watching. My mother looked down at her plate, embarrassed. Tessa was watching from behind Daphne, looking gleeful at the prospect of my public shaming. I did not flinch. I did not lower my voice. "There is no groom's honor table. Daphne," I said calmly. "There is table 2. It is an excellent table. It has a lovely view of the garden." "Table 2? Daphne laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "You expect the Hale family to sit at a round table like guests?" "You are guests, Daphne," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. "And as for the honor table," I continued, gesturing to the small table set for Graham and me, "the only people receiving honor today are the bride and groom. If anyone else wants a table of honor, they are welcome to get married themselves." A few guests stifled chuckles. Someone near the back, I think it was one of Graham's college friends, actually snorted. Daphne's face turned a shade of red that clashed violently with her champagne dress. She looked around the room, expecting to see outrage, expecting the senator or the board members to rise up in her defense, but they were just sitting there, holding their napkins, waiting for dinner. They were hungry. They did not care about her perceived slight. For the first time, Daphne looked small. "Sit down, Mom," Graham said. He had come up behind me, his hand resting on the small of my back. His voice was not loud, but it was firm. "Please, you are making a scene." Daphne looked at her son. She saw the unity in our stance. She saw that he was not stepping forward to fix it for her. She let out a short, sharp breath through her nose. "Fine," she snapped. "If this is how you want to start your marriage, with disrespect." "I am starting it with equality," I said. "Enjoy the salad, Daphne. The dressing is excellent." She turned and marched to table 2, pulling out her chair with enough force to rattle the silverware. Tessa scuttled after her, casting a dirty look in my direction. I walked back to the sweetheart table with Graham. As we sat down, he let out a long exhale. "I cannot believe you said that," he whispered, picking up his wineglass. "If you want honor, get married." That was intense. "It was necessary," I said, unfolding my napkin. She was trying to mark her territory. "Graham, I just reminded her that she is visiting, not conquering." The dinner service began. The food was impeccable. Seared scallops and filet mignon. Far better than the rubbery chicken the Harbor Estate had planned. The wine flowed. The atmosphere in the room shifted from tense to celebratory as the guests relaxed. But I did not relax. I ate my dinner with one eye on table 2. Daphne was eating aggressively, stabbing her steak as if it were a voodoo doll of me. She was talking animatedly to the guests at her table, gesturing toward the staff, clearly complaining about the service. Halfway through the main course, I saw her snap her fingers. It was not a polite wave. It was a crisp, loud snap, the kind one uses to summon a disobedient dog. A young server, a girl of maybe 20 named Sarah, hurried over to table 2. I watched as Daphne pointed at the wine bottle on the table, then pointed at the empty glasses of the table next to them, then pointed at the kitchen. She was giving orders. Sarah looked confused. She shook her head slightly. Daphne's face hardened. She said something sharp, and Sarah looked on the verge of tears. I stood up. "Where are you going?" Graham asked, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Management," I said. I walked over to the side of the room where Elias, the venue manager, was overseeing the service. I caught his eye and motioned him over. "Ms. Whitfield," Elias said, leaning in. "Is everything to your liking?" "The food is perfect, Elias," I said, "but we have a personnel issue at table 2. "I saw," Elias said, his expression tightening. "Mrs. Hale is attempting to reallocate the wine inventory. She wants us to take the reserve bottles from the other tables and consolidate them at her table and the senator's table. She told the server that she is the host, and her instructions supersede the run of show." "And what did Sarah tell her?" "Sarah told her that the wine allocation was set by the contract," Elias said. "Mrs. Hale did not appreciate that. She threatened to have Sarah fired." I felt the cold anger ripple through me again. It was one thing to come for me. It was another thing to punch down at a young girl trying to do her job. "Elias," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "I want you to go to table 2 personally. I want you to inform Mrs. Hale, loud enough for her table to hear, that the staff takes instructions solely from the client, and the client is Mara Whitfield." Elias hesitated. "Are you sure, ma'am? That might escalate things." "She is bullying your staff, Elias. If you do not stop her, I will go over there and do it myself, and I promise you, that will be much less diplomatic." Elias nodded. "Understood." I watched as Elias straightened his jacket and walked over to table 2. I stayed back, but I was close enough to hear. Daphne was in the middle of lecturing poor Sarah. "I do not care what the list says. I am telling you to bring the Pinot Noir here. Do you know who I am?" "Mrs. Hale," Elias interrupted, his voice smooth and professional baritone carrying easily over the clatter of silverware. Daphne turned, looking relieved to see a man in a suit. "Finally, someone with authority. This girl is incompetent. I gave her a simple instruction regarding the wine service, and she is arguing with me." "The server is following protocol, Mrs. Hale," Elias said. He did not lower his voice. "I must ask you to stop giving instructions to the service team." Daphne froze. "Excuse me?" "The event contract is very specific," Elias continued, his face impassive. "All directives regarding inventory and service flow must come directly from Ms. Whitfield. We are not authorized to accept changes from any other party. If you need more wine, I can bring you a bill for a supplemental bottle, but I cannot reallocate the guests' wine based on your request." The guests at table 2, including the senator, stopped eating. They looked at Daphne. "Ms. Whitfield?" Daphne sputtered. "I am the mother of the groom. I am the hostess." "Ms. Whitfield is the client," Elias corrected gently, "and she has instructed us to ensure that all guests are treated equally. Please, enjoy your dinner." Elias gave a short, respectful bow and walked away, signaling for Sarah to follow him. Daphne sat there, her mouth slightly ajar. She looked across the room and locked eyes with me. I was standing near a pillar, holding my champagne glass. I raised it slightly in her direction. A silent toast. Checkmate. She did not explode. She did not scream. That would have been too easy. Instead, a terrifying transformation came over her face. The shock vanished. The anger smoothed out. In its place, a cold, porcelain mask of a smile appeared. It was the smile of a woman who realizes that the skirmishes are over and total war has been declared. She picked up her wine glass and took a long sip. Then she turned to her husband and said something that made him look nervous. 10 minutes later, during the transition between dinner and the speeches, Daphne walked past me on her way to the powder room. The room was loud with laughter and clinking glasses, but the space between us felt like a vacuum. She stopped. She did not look at me directly. She looked at the orchids on the display table next to me. "You think you have won," she said softly. Her voice was like silk dragged over a razor blade. "You think because you signed a check and moved a party, you have power." "I think I have boundaries, Daphne," I replied. "And I think you are having a hard time finding them." She finally turned her head to look at me. Her eyes were dead. There was no warmth, no motherly affection, not even the pretense of it. "Enjoy your night, Mara," she said. "Enjoy your little victory with the waiters and the seating charts. But tomorrow morning, the music stops, and you will understand that in the Hale family, the one who holds the pen is not always the one who decides the future." "Is that a threat?" I asked. She smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, and that was what made it terrifying. "It is a promise," she said. "You have embarrassed me in front of my friends. You have alienated my son. You have turned the help against me. You have made your point." She leaned in closer, smelling of expensive perfume and malice. "But you forget one thing, darling. You married a Hale, and Hales protect their own. Graham might be enchanted by you tonight, but blood is thicker than ink. When the dust settles, he will remember who he is. And you will just be the woman who tried to break us." She patted my arm. It was a patronizing, possessive touch. "I will see you at brunch," she whispered. "If you are still invited." She walked away, her hips swaying, her head held high. I stood there, watching her retreating figure. My heart was pounding against my ribs, not from fear, but from the realization that she truly did not know. She thought this was about social standing. She thought this was about Graham's loyalty. She thought she could wait me out, wear me down, and eventually reabsorb Graham into the fold while discarding me. She did not know about the safe in the bridal suite. She did not know about the lien on the marina. She did not know that the legacy she was so desperate to protect was already mortgaged to the hilt, and that the documents proving her fraud were sitting 10 feet away from me. "You are right, Daphne," I whispered to the empty air. "Blood is thicker than ink, but prison bars are thicker than both." I turned back to the party. Graham was waving at me from the dance floor, beckoning me to join him. I walked toward him, my decision hardening with every step. I had given her a chance to back down. I had given her a chance to just be a guest, but she had chosen to threaten me. She had chosen to double down. I would dance with my husband. I would cut the cake. I would smile for the photos. But when the speeches started, Daphne Hale was going to learn that you never, ever threaten a risk investigator who has already finished her audit. The champagne flute clinked against the silverware, a high, piercing sound that cut through the jazz music and the chatter of the reception. It was the sound of a summons. I looked up from my sweetheart table. Daphne Hale was standing at table 2, a glass of vintage Dom Perignon, which I had paid for, raised high in her manicured hand. The room fell silent, the guests turning in their chairs, expecting the standard mother-of-the-groom sentimentality. Graham stiffened beside me, his hand instinctively gripping his napkin. "If I could have everyone's attention," Daphne began, her voice amplified by the microphone she had commandeered from the DJ. She did not look at me. She looked at the senator, then at her wealthy friends, treating the room like a campaign rally. I know it is traditional for the best man to speak first, but as the matriarch of the Hale family, I felt compelled to say a few words about this unique occasion. She paused for effect, offering a benevolent, pitying smile to the room. "Marriage," she continued, "is about understanding order. It is about recognizing that a family like ours is a grand, historic vessel, and every vessel needs a captain, and every vessel needs a crew." I took a sip of water. I knew exactly where this was going. "Graham, my darling boy, you are the captain now," Daphne said, beaming at him. "You carry the Hale legacy, and Mara." She finally turned her eyes to me. They were cold, dead things masked by heavy mascara. "Mara, We welcome you as the newest member of our crew. We are so grateful to have someone so functional, someone who understands that her role is to support, to facilitate, and to ensure that the Hales can continue to shine. There was a ripple of uncomfortable shifting in the room. The compliment was a backhanded slap, framing me as a utility player, a glorified assistant to her son's brilliance. You have shown us today. With all this, she waved a hand vaguely at the venue I had chosen. Scrambling and logistics, that you are truly in your element when you are working in the background, and that is a virtue, my dear. Not everyone is born to lead. Some are born to serve, and we are so happy you know your position. Graham started to push his chair back, his face flushing red. Mom, that is enough. I am not finished, darling, Daphne said, her voice turning steel-hard for a fraction of a second before softening again. Tessa, I believe we have a little welcome gift for Mara, something to help her settle into her new duties. Tessa stood up from table 2. She was holding a box wrapped in silver paper. She walked over to our table, her heels clicking loudly on the dance floor. She had a smirk on her face that she was trying, and failing, to hide. She placed the box in front of me. Go on, Tessa urged, leaning into the microphone Daphne was holding. Open it. It is a family tradition. I looked at the box. I looked at Graham. He looked ready to flip the table. You do not have to open that, Graham said to me. It is fine, I said. My voice was calm. I reached out and undid the ribbon. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a silver service bell, the kind you see on the front desk of a hotel, or in a dining room in 1920, used to summon the maid. Attached to it was a small note that Tessa read aloud before I could touch it. For when things get too complicated, Tessa read, her voice dripping with mockery, and you need to remember that service is the highest calling. Welcome to the help, Mara. The room went deathly silent. It was a direct callback to the rehearsal dinner. It was a public branding. They were telling 150 people, my parents, my friends, their business partners, that I was nothing more than hired help who had slept her way into a uniform. Graham stood up so fast his chair fell backward with a loud crash. Get out, he said, his voice shaking with rage. Both of you, get out. Daphne looked shocked by his outburst, but she stood her ground. Graham, we are joking. It is a joke. Do not be so dramatic. It is not a joke, Graham shouted. You are insulting my wife. I reached out and placed my hand on Graham's arm. Graham, I said softly. Sit down. Mara, I can't let them. Sit down, I repeated. My voice was not loud, but it carried the absolute authority of a judge banging a gavel. I can handle this. Graham looked at me. He saw the look in my eyes. It was not the look of a victim. It was the look of an executioner who had just finished sharpening the blade. He slowly righted his chair and sat, watching me. I stood up. I picked up the silver bell. I held it up to the light, inspecting it as if it were a rare artifact. Thank you, Tessa, I said. My voice was clear, projected without a microphone, but in the silence of the conservatory, it reached every corner. And thank you, Daphne. This is truly clarifying. I set the bell down gently. You talk a lot about service, I said, looking directly at Daphne. You talk about positions, about who leads and who serves, about who pays the bills and who shines in the spotlight. I agree. Transparency is vital in a marriage. And since we are sharing gifts that reflect our true value to this family, I have a gift for you as well. Daphne frowned. We do not want your gifts. Oh, I think you will want to see this one, I said. It is educational. I raised my hand and signaled to the tech booth at the back of the room. Elias, if you please. The lights in the conservatory dimmed. A large projection screen, which was intended to show a montage of our childhood photos later in the evening, descended from the ceiling behind the sweetheart table. What is she doing? Tessa whispered loudly. I took the liberty of preparing a small presentation, I said, walking out from behind the table to stand in the center of the floor. Daphne mentioned that I am good at logistics. That is true. But my actual profession is risk assessment. I investigate the financial health of institutions, and since I am joining the Hale institution, I did my due diligence. The projector hummed to life. A stark white slide appeared on the screen. In bold, black letters, it read, "Publicly available records. A clarification." Daphne lowered the microphone. She took a step forward. "Mara, stop this. This is childish." "It is not childish, Daphne," I said, smiling pleasantly. "It is public record. Everything I am about to show is available to anyone with an internet connection and $20 for a filing fee. I just saved everyone the trouble of looking it up." I clicked the small remote I had concealed in my palm. The slide changed. It was a scanned document, a deed of trust. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "is the deed to the Hale family vineyard estate, the one Daphne claims has been in the family for 4 generations, the one she uses as a symbol of the Hale stability." I clicked again. A red circle appeared around a section of the document. "As you can see," I narrated, my voice cool and professional, 3 years ago, the title was transferred to an entity called Meridian Shoreline Holdings, a shell company. "Stop it!" Daphne shouted. She moved toward me, looking like she intended to physically grab the remote. "Turn it off! Graham, make her turn it off!" Graham sat stone still, his eyes glued to the screen. "Keep going, Mara," he said. I clicked again. "And here," I said, "is the loan application submitted 6 months ago for the refinancing of the Seabriar Marina, a project the Hales claim to own outright." The document on the screen was dense, but I had highlighted the relevant paragraph in neon yellow. "In this section," I explained, "Daphne Hale lists the vineyard estate as unencumbered collateral to secure a loan of $3 million. I turned to look at Daphne. She had stopped moving. Her face had gone the color of ash. She knew what was coming. She knew I had found the mismatch. "The problem," I said, addressing the room like I was briefing a board of directors, "is that you cannot use property you do not own as collateral for a bank loan. You sold the vineyard to the shell company to hide assets from a previous lawsuit, which is the document on the next slide, by the way, but you forgot that you cannot pledge what isn't yours." I clicked the remote. The screen filled with a blown-up image of the signature page. Daphne's signature was large, looping, and arrogant. Below it was the date. And next to it, I had superimposed a screenshot from the county clerk's office showing the real ownership status of the vineyard on that exact date. "This is called bank fraud," I said. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "It is a federal crime, punishable by up to 30 years in prison and a fine of up to $1 million. The room erupted. Chairs scraped as people leaned forward. The senator, who had been sitting at table 2, suddenly looked very interested in his phone, likely texting his PR team to distance himself. You bitch," Daphne whispered. She raised the microphone to scream it, to drown me out, but the sound cut out instantly. I had instructed Elias to kill her audio feed the moment the first slide went up. She tapped the mic frantically. Nothing. She was silenced. "Do not worry," I said, my voice still amplified by the lapel mic I had clipped to my dress earlier. "I have not sent this to the bank yet, or the FBI. I just wanted to clarify my position." I walked over to table 2. I stood right in front of Daphne, who was trembling, clutching the dead microphone like a lifeline. Tessa was sobbing silently, her face buried in her hands. "You told me to know my place," I said to Daphne. "You told me I was the help. You were right. I am the help. I am the only person who can help you stay out of jail." I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went black, save for one single line of text in white. "Current outstanding debt of the Hale Meridian Group, $8,400,000. The number was so large, so specific, and so undeniable that it sucked the oxygen out of the room. "You are broke, Daphne," I said softly, so only she and the people at the nearby tables could hear. "You are living on loans you obtained fraudulently. You are borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and Peter is about to call the cops." Daphne looked at the screen. Then she looked at the senator, who was actively moving his chair away from her table. Then she looked at her husband, who had his head in his hands. Finally, she looked at me. There was no arrogance left, no matriarchal power, just the terrified stare of a woman who had been stripping the copper wiring out of the walls of her palace to keep the lights on, and had just been caught with the wire cutters in her hand. "Happy wedding day," I said. "Now, I believe it is time for the cake, unless you want me to show the next slide. It covers the tax evasion on the marina revenue." Daphne shook her head. It was a jerky, spasmodic motion. "No," she mouthed. "No." "Good," I said. I turned to the guests, my smile returning, bright and dazzling. "I apologize for the interruption. Everyone, just a little family business. Please, let's give a round of applause for the mother of the groom, who I am sure is feeling very reflective right now." I started clapping. Slowly, awkwardly. A few people joined in, then a few more. It was a smattering of applause that sounded more like a funeral dirge. Daphne sank into her chair. She looked small. She looked old. And for the first time in her life, she looked absolutely silent. The silence that followed my revelation was heavy, thick with the weight of $8 million in debt hanging over the room like a dark cloud. The guests were no longer looking at Daphne Hale with admiration. They were looking at her with the scrutiny of creditors. I stepped away from the screen, letting the numbers burn into their retinas for a moment longer before I signaled Elias to cut the projector. The room returned to soft, ambient lighting, but the atmosphere had shifted permanently. "You see," I said, my voice calm and conversational, addressing the room but looking only at Daphne. "When you spent the last 6 months treating me like a liability, you forgot to check if your own house was up to code. I did not do this to be cruel. I did this because in my line of work, we have a rule: never merge with a failing entity unless you have a restructuring plan." Daphne was shaking. Her hands gripped the tablecloth of table 2 so hard her knuckles were white. "You are lying," she whispered, though her voice lacked any conviction. "You are twisting things." "I am not twisting anything, Daphne," I replied. "I am auditing, and I am not finished." I took a step closer to her table. "You were so angry that I moved the wedding from the harbor estate," I said. "You claimed I was disrespecting tradition, but here's the first surprise of the evening. Did you know that the harbor estate is currently under investigation by the state liquor authority for operating without a valid license for the past 6 months?" Daphne blinked. "What?" "If we had held the wedding there tonight," I explained, "there is a 90% chance the police would have raided the venue by 9 o'clock. I did not move the venue just to annoy you. I moved it to save you from being handcuffed in your mother of the groom dress. I identified the risk, and I mitigated it. That is what I do." A murmur went through the crowd. I saw the senator nod slowly, recognizing the bullet he had just dodged. "And then there is the matter of the bar tab," I continued, turning my gaze to a man sitting next to Daphne, Mr. Sterling, a longtime family friend. Daphne told me that Mr. Sterling here had graciously offered to sponsor the bar tonight as a wedding gift, a lovely gesture, except when I reviewed the contract Daphne sent over, I noticed the sponsorship was being funneled through a charity foundation. Mr. Sterling froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. "Using a charitable foundation to pay for a private wedding reception is tax fraud," I said pleasantly. "It is money laundering. I rejected that contract and paid for the bar myself, directly from my personal savings. So, Mr. Sterling, you are welcome. I just kept you out of federal prison." Mr. Sterling turned pale and scooted his chair inches away from Daphne. Daphne looked around. Her allies were retreating. Her facade was crumbling. She stood up, knocking her chair back. "This is blackmail," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You are blackmailing us. You are demanding money to keep these secrets." "Blackmail?" I repeated the word, tasting it. "No, Daphne, you are confused. Blackmail is a transaction. It implies I want something of financial value from you, but as we have clearly established, you have no money. I walked back to the center of the room and stood next to Graham. He was sitting there, looking at his mother, then at the screen where the debt figure had been, and then at me. He looked like a man who had just watched a skyscraper collapse and realized he had been standing in the lobby. I am not asking for money, I said. I am offering you a choice, a settlement, if you will. I held up 2 fingers. Option A, I said. You will apologize. Not a fake apology, not a sorry you felt that way apology, a real one. You will acknowledge that you tried to humiliate me. You will sign a legal document, which my lawyer has in his car outside, stating that you will never interfere in our finances, our marriage, or our future children's lives. You will respect the boundaries I set, and in exchange, I will keep these files private. I will help you restructure your debt legally. I will help you save your reputation, simply because you are Graham's mother. The room held its breath. And option B, Daphne hissed. Option B, I said, my voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze nitrogen. I walk out of here, and tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I forward this entire slide deck to the State Attorney General, the IRS, and the Compliance Board of your primary lender, because as a licensed risk investigator, I have a professional, ethical obligation to report fraud when I find it. Daphne stared at me. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, looking for someone to save her. You would not, she said. You would destroy your own husband's family. I would save my husband from going down with the ship, I corrected. Graham is not on these loan documents. You are. His credit is clean. Yours is terminal. Graham, Daphne screamed, turning to her son. Are you going to let her do this? She is holding a gun to my head. She is threatening your mother. Graham stood up. For a second, I felt a flicker of fear. Old habits die hard. He had spent 32 years protecting her. Graham looked at his mother. He looked at the tears streaming down her face. Tears of rage, not sorrow. Then he looked at me. He saw the woman who had paid for his tuxedo, the woman who had saved his friends from a police raid, the woman who had been told to sit with the help and had responded by buying the building. He walked over to me and took my hand. She is not threatening you. Mom, Graham said. His voice was steady. It was the voice of a man who had finally grown up. She is offering you a lifeboat. You just have to stop drilling holes in the hull. Graham, Daphne gasped. You told her to sit with the help, Graham said. You tried to make my wife a servant. I will not live in a house where that is the law. I choose her. I choose Mara. And if that means we walk out of here and let you deal with the consequences of your own fraud, then so be it. Daphne reeled back as if he had slapped her. She looked at her husband, Robert. Robert had his head bowed, staring at his plate. He knew the game was up. Robert? Daphne whispered. Sign the paper, Daphne, Robert said quietly, without looking up. Just sign the paper. The fight went out of her. It happened all at once. Her shoulders slumped. The venom drained away, leaving only a tired, defeated woman in a dress she could not afford. Fine, she whispered. I accept option A. I thought you might, I said. I signaled to the back of the room. My lawyer, a discreet man named David who had been enjoying the hors d'oeuvres, walked forward with a folder. He placed it on table 2 in front of Daphne. She signed it. She did not read it. She just signed it. I waited until the pen was down. Then I looked at her one last time. Hindsight is 20/20, Daphne, I said. Yesterday, at the rehearsal, you told me to sit with the help because you thought that was where I belonged. You thought there were masters and there were servants. I paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. Today, I just wanted to correct the record. In the real world, the one who signs the checks is the master, and those who act like tyrants, well, they end up sitting alone. I turned to Graham. Are you ready to go? Yes, he said. I am ready. We did not stay for the cake. We did not stay for the dancing. We walked out of the Ravenport Conservatory, hand in hand, down the aisle of white wisteria. The music was still playing, a soft, triumphant jazz number, but nobody was watching the band. They were watching us leave. We walked out into the cool night air, leaving the Hales behind in their glass cage, surrounded by the beautiful, expensive prison I had built for them. I had changed the venue, I had changed the seating chart, but most importantly, I had changed the one thing that actually mattered. I had changed the owner. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I really hope you enjoyed Mara's journey from the back table to the head of the boardroom. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from today. Please drop a comment below and let me know which country or city you are representing. If you enjoyed this takedown, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need a little justice in their lives. See you in the next video.